How's it going, everybody? We're Kinetic Impact. This is Dr. Ben, chiropractor, strength coach. This is Dr. Kevin. You were a little too early. Dr. Kevin, physical therapist, strength coach. I'm Dr. Donald, chiropractor and strength coach. Yes, we do get along, even though we're chiropractors and physical therapists. Today, we want to talk to you guys about sciatica and the prognosis of sciatica. So hopefully we'll be able to help those who are going through the experience and experiencing sciatica, low back pain with leg pain, all the way down, or those practitioners that struggle with helping people with sciatica. So we're going to review a blog written by Tom Jessen. It's a really good blog, one of the best I've seen on the prognosis of sciatica. Kind of culminates a lot of research articles and gives his 2 cents, mainly on the nuances of why 4 to 6 weeks, you're going to be better in 4 to 6 weeks, is not the complete advice, and there's a little bit more nuances to it. Right. So the first thing is talking about acute sciatica, as you just had those symptoms and it's pretty fresh and hot. For those people, he talks about the rules of third, meaning that a third of people that have sciatica that is acute, a third of those people will get better in the first 4 to 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's another third that will get better slightly. So the first third better a lot, second third slightly better, but there's the last third that stays the same or could even get worse. Why is this important?
Yeah. Also, an important thing to note on the thirds. So, of the 2/3 of people that get better, those people still will continue to often have like some issue, right? Like little nagging things here and there, and they also will get reoccurrence. So, even though they're better in that time period of that acute phase, and this is what I think we're trying to allude to, is it's a little bit more complicated than that, not that simple.
Yeah, I think it's important. For me personally, I think it's important to have this conversation with people right away, because it could be super discouraging if that 4 to 6 weeks timeline is up and the symptoms haven't gotten any better, right? Like it's like that's really discouraging if the expectations are, hey, I will get better in 4 to 6 weeks. That's what everybody's telling me. Now it's 4 to 6 weeks. Why the hell? What did I do wrong? What's wrong with me? Right? There's a third of the population. It's a fairly decent number. The third of the people, they don't get better or sometimes get worse within that time frame. So I think that's important for people too.
Yeah, I think with the rule of thirds is like creating that expectation for that person, letting them know there's a chance that you will improve and see improvements, but there's also a possibility there you might not have any changes or it could get worse. I think if you tell them early on, let them know that these are possibilities when they do have these situations that do arise, it's not as scary for them. They're okay. They told me though that it was gonna happen, and I expected it to happen. So now, when navigating through like some situations like that, it's easier to have that conversation with them.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's also important too, because it allows people to not like put their lives on hold, and for these 4 to 6 weeks, it's not like, oh, I had to put everything aside because you know what, it's going to be better in 4 to 6 weeks. So now I hold everything and wait for this 4 to 6 weeks. Well, now it's more so let's take a proactive approach and say, okay, let's do what we can in these 4 to 6 weeks, and be prepared no matter what happens at the end of the road in that time frame. I think that's really important.
And it just generally speaks to like the messiness of pain in general. Like it's just not super clear, it's not really clear cut. And also like the concept that we always talk about is when somebody's experiencing pain, because there's a lot of these factors, and when we're looking at the stats on sciatica, it does seem to have a lot of reoccurrence during that time. That doesn't mean that you can't improve things. Like the other thing is understanding pain a little bit better. I've seen lots of people that are currently experiencing pain make gains, right? Like get stronger, get faster, improve other qualities of endurance. So even though these things are going on, I think it's important to realize like, let's make that cup bigger. Let's make you more robust, and let's make that pain have less of an effect on you because you're a more powerful organism. I think that's a key part of when you're looking at this prognosis. Another thing is like just stop doing stuff because it's it'll get better. and it might not.
I
So
think also using like pain as the prognosis sometimes will also dictate where to go to. Like using pain as a guide for them puts them away from doing things. I think that's something that we
Yeah.
need to shift away using. Okay, you can do this when your pain is gone,
Yeah.
but then when you do go back and do something, your level of function has decreased. Like your ability to, your strength, your endurance, those things have
Yeah.
decreased in 4 to 6 weeks also. So when you do rest 4 to 6 weeks and you do go back into your activity, you may not have that general physical fitness that you once had. So now within that, what Ben was saying is like we can raise that cup in that period, allows that functional ceiling to raise up and gives that pain to that functional status creates a bigger gap for the people. So I think that where Ben said is like get them
Yeah.
strong, build that cup for them.
It's like using pain not only as the only data point that you care about, right? It is a data point. It can be respected, but it doesn't need to rule the conversation. It's a part of many data points, right? Like, do you have better energy? Is your cardio getting better? There's so many things that we can improve in the presence of an injury or pain, and oftentimes we forget about that because society and people around us have so much weight on pain. Okay, so I think that's a super important component. Let's move to the next topic that Tom Jessen talks about, which is there's a 50% resolution rate within 3 months. For about half of all people seeking care with sciatica, pain will resolve or nearly resolve within 3 months. So now it's accumulating both acute and chronic, correct? And about half of those people that seek care for sciatica will have improvement in the first 3 months.
yeah.
Anything that jumps out at us for this and talking points right away, Ben?
Yeah, I just want to kind of allude to as we're like going through this article and we're discussing these broad-based concepts that there's a lot of research here. So I encourage just reading this to kind of decipher some of the information yourself. The key point, I think, when we're looking at these kinds of things is realizing that this is not the natural history of sciatica, meaning like this isn't always followed from the onset of sciatica, but more the onset of treating sciatica. We're also looking at situations where oftentimes people are seeking treatment, which I think just when you're into looking to get better, it can affect outcomes and those kinds of things. So it is generalized. I would like to just share these things, some history. The German surgeon Hermann Oppenheim noted, and he noted this, that back then sciatica was showing very similar characteristics. They were showing that people would find pain resolution and plateaus in pain after the first 6 weeks. Hippocrates looked at it as after 40 days, sciatica seemed to get better, which we see is still holding up, right? So this isn't like new to humans, like all of a sudden sciatica is a new thing. It seemed like elderly would get better after a year. He also treated it with heat and donkey milk, which I think like we still treat sciatica sometimes with heat and donkey milk, depending on where you go, or things of that nature. Where we also just look at, and this isn't the topic for today, but when we just look at stuff, we want to not become dogmatic and always think that we have a solution that's yielding these amazing results. 4 to 6 weeks and 3 months yields pretty amazing results for a certain percentage of the population in general, whether you're following a plan that's trying to make you more robust, whether you're being manipulated by a chiropractor or you're drinking donkey milk. There could be lots of factors going on what's getting better in this time. But back to these other observations that I pulled us off course for a minute.
One of my favorite like quotes, if you will, from the blog, Tom just puts, or put it another way, when you see a new patient, talking to clinicians or practitioners, when you see a new patient with sciatica, there's a 50-50 chance that their pain will be gone or essentially gone in the next 3 months. And I don't think a lot of clinicians admit to that. I think that's the best way to put it. Admit to that outcome, because that doesn't sound like a fairly great outcome. But I think, like, again, setting expectations is huge, right? When you have the culmination of acute and persistent sciatica people all together within 3 months, 50-50 chance that it's going to be better. Right. So if you're selling rainbows and butterflies that things are going to be better right around the corner, I think it's a very risky sell. And that's not a way to build trust, in my personal opinion.
Yeah,
So I think that was very, very well put.
yeah, it's like flipping a coin. Like,
Yeah.
that person could literally
And
sit
it's
in your
not
office and be like, "Is this going to be better?" And you're like,
right.
"Yes."
And that's in the the presence of pain. And going back to our previous points, like that's why I think that pain shouldn't be the only data point that we're looking for in regards to like what brings people success in regards to their treatment, if you will, or just life in general.
Yeah, and this is looking at like a goal-specific outcomes are much better, I think, than pain-specific outcomes, and they create like a different thing to be able to focus on as this process isn't comfortable, right? And it isn't clear cut, and it doesn't seem to have this amazing resolution. And here's the thing in my own clinical experience that I've seen, it's like I've seen sciatica in a lot of different kinds of patients. We've seen it in like young athletes. We've seen it in elderly patients. We've seen it in patients where it's induced by possibly a trauma, like a car accident. We've seen a lot of these outcomes. I've seen extremely strong people deal with sciatica. So we can't just simply like say the stronger you are, the less likely it
That's a
is
great point.
to occur. But I do think that the more robust the person is, the more likely they are to do meaningful things, and they can manage these symptoms much better than a person that's shying away from social things and also being choosing to live a lifestyle that may promote some frailty out of fear. So I don't think being afraid of it is necessarily a good answer either to the problem. I think being able to address it and create like realistic goals and expectations is really what this article is trying to get people to look at. And then also realize that there's a lot of silver lining and positivity with this kind of research that's being done and looking at it. And you can do a lot more than you think you can do while this is occurring, right? Always trying to see that silver lining.
For sure. Anything you want to add? Anybody wants to add before moving on to the next topic of the?
I think right there with that quote, I think one part to add is like we can assume people with acute pain will have better odds. So people that come see you earlier or people that experience like a flare up and seek treatment, they're more likely to have success right away. So within that 4 to 6 weeks, that might be a little bit more true for people that do come in with like more mild symptoms or not as chronic
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah. Where it's like at an acute peak.
Yes,
Right.
correct.
Yeah.
And I think also during that time, with short enough, like they don't have learned behaviors yet. So I think that's another thing.
Aspect. Yeah.
Another aspect to it is like when you live with persistent pain for so long, you have a learned perspective of pain, and you live with pain for so long, like the beliefs might be harder to
Yeah.
change too.
And,
So
and that you see learned behaviors in a lot of different things, right? Like you'll see people move in a way that appears to be guarded. What's really interesting about guarded postures that are showing pain, that's a very, very great strategy for a very acute situation. But after a long time period, what it does is it just promotes atrophy. It promotes, I would say, for lack of a better term, unnatural motor patterns. And I think a lot of those will continue to perpetuate that chronicity of movement. So being able to address learned behavior in like those subconscious, maybe they're not aware of it, movement patterns early on could probably yield better outcomes and also prevent things that could create chronic situations.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a great point. So moving on to the next point, it's fairly similar to this one, but this next point and headline is there's a 3 to 4 month improvement window. The bulk of improvement in pain takes place in the first 3 to 4 months after seeking the treatment. Again, these are all looking after the point of seeking treatment, and the biggest improvement in the amount of pain is in that first 3 to 4 month window. What jumped out to you guys in this section of the article or blog?
I think the plateau part, the next part, right? So you get this massive improvement, and we're 3 or 4 months into whatever we're doing, and ideally we've got people thinking about long-term adaptations, longevity, your life beyond just this one moment of pain, but also like doing exercise and activities that promote long-term health. But also realizing like, hey, around the corner, we might be confronted with an uncomfortable situation that's going to rear its ugly head
Mhm.
again. And how are we going to be better equipped to handle it clinically? Having that awareness that there's a risk that this may happen. Again, I think we talk about success stories when people come in and they're flared up and they seem to be like positive and they're like, it's okay. Like last time this happened, we're gonna trim this down, right? So it's like you hear this like good relationship with like, yeah, I'm flared up, but like let's go do stuff. You know, when you see that, that's very different than like, I'm flared up, I can't move, I can't bend down, I can't do anything. That's a very different thought and approach towards a very similar situation. But those plateaus, right, that they can come.
And
And
it's in,
go ahead.
and it's interesting to see not just from this study but other studies that 3 to 4 month mark is where a lot of these studies plateau at, where the people plateau.
Yeah.
So now, why do these people kind of plateau around this mark? That kind of give us like a insights. Okay, when you're reaching that 3 to 4 months of treatment, like where is the progress? Like now, where do we need to pivot as a clinician? Like, are we still making that same rate of change that we did early on, or this is kind of where we have to look back at like how can we help them? Like, what are our programs doing now in
Yeah,
order
and
to change that?
like in what other ways can we add value to their lives?
Yeah.
Right. Outside of just the presence of pain, or can we utilize other things to hopefully help tick more positive numbers outside of like that plateauing? I think is a good point. These graphs from all these different studies too are very great visuals. I'll see what I can do on my end in regards to tech and put them in the video for you guys to
Yeah.
see. Again, I encourage you guys to read this blog by Tom Jess, and I'll put in the notes. But the actual graphs themselves are just great visuals to see that it's a noticeable plateau once that 3 to 4 month improvement window closes, right, with
There,
time.
there's also like a in that around that same area. I think you can maybe speak to this because it's changed. We were just talking about this in the back and how it gave you a different thought as it relates to potential surgical interventions, as they looked at surgical interventions and how it affected both short-term and long-term pain outcomes. So I thought it was interesting that when you looked at a surgical intervention versus a non-surgical intervention, I think one of the things to note was that in the long term, there seemed to be a very similar outcome.
Mm-hmm.
However, and this makes us revisit the discussion of potential surgical interventions, is that short term, the pain seemed to drop substantially, right?
Yeah.
So this is a person with a similar 1 year outcome, and this isn't a 20-year thing, right? That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But it's also worth like, how much pain is this person experiencing? And just because you know it potentially is going to get better in a year, can we get them back to what they want to do faster? And is surgery now a discussion that potentially may make sense for some individuals in some populations, depending on what they're experiencing?
Yeah.
I think it makes me fear it a little bit less. It doesn't need to be as demonized.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to like my personal bias, like what I thought that most people, if not all people, want to avoid having surgery at all costs because you hear these nightmare scenarios. However, I think about the person that with raging sciatica and can't get to their day to day, and it's taking them out of work, it's taking them out of their social lives, and it's having a big effect. And conservative treatment isn't working, or maybe it's the pain is just awful, and epidural didn't even help. Right in this scenario, it makes sense if they know and understand the risk factors for surgery, and they've talked to a surgeon who would know more than me. I'm definitely not a surgeon, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I used to have this negative connotation, like you had mentioned, and now it makes sense when it makes sense, right? Yeah, we see there's a really good graph that I'll put on here. We see that early surgery has really fast improvements, and then it plateaus out, similar to conservative care, and it kind of meets in a year about the same, right? So if it's manageable symptoms, surgery is pretty costly and there's risk factors, so it doesn't make sense to do, right? But if it's incredibly awful, and I feel for those people, and them knowing that surgery is an option and that the risks may not be as big of a deal as the benefits that they might get. I think that could be very life changing for that person, and it could keep them away from being putting their life on hold. Right? So I think that's important. It changed my bias, if you will.
Yeah, I think being open to those kinds of things and hearing it it's always good. Again, not being a surgeon. Um, I know that like these surgical procedures, they're not all created equal, right? So if that is an option you're exploring, I think it's really good to not discuss this in a broad sense, but this is where having an individualized consultation is really helpful with several parties working together.
So the next topic. Let's move on to the next topic. I think this one we could cover fairly quick. It's one of the very optimistic statistics that he brings up. 4 out of 5 people are relatively happy with their outcomes after a year. And I'll go back to a previous the statistic of it's 50-50 whether somebody will be better in 3 months, right? So that doesn't sound very good, but 4 out of 5 of those people are going to be happy, right? So again, pain isn't everything, and people are happy with outcomes. Even those part of those 50% of the people that still have symptoms are a percentage of those are happy with the outcome, right? So I think that's very positive. Granted, this is a very rough guesstimate that he's accumulated from multiple different studies. And he does admit if it's wrong, it's on the optimistic side. But I'm all for that. I think that just alludes to our previous points that there's much deeper things and much more than just using pain as your only data point for success. That's what I got on this. Anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, I want to just the pessimistic side of that. If we were to break down that percentage of the population, the 1 out of 5 people, or 20%, or however you come up with that, which is a fairly high percentage, right? Half of those people, so like 10%, are worse. That's the sad side.
Yeah. Worse is a possibility. I
Yeah.
think that's an important thing.
Mhm.
Like becoming worse is a possibility.
Yeah.
It's not. There's just all over the place in regards to
Yeah.
outcomes.
And I guess another thing to ask you guys based off this, and there's another really good talking point here. In your clinical experiences dealing with a lot of like sciatica, and with our chiropractic background, those things are very, people came to us early on, so I think we saw a lot of
You're a chiro.
chiropractic.
They can help my back.
Yeah, so that was like a lot of the people that are initially just drawn to the name of your title.
Mm-hmm.
How has some of these things played out? Do you have contradictory things that you've seen? Does this play out similar to what some of your experience has been? Have you seen patients that haven't gotten better, and what does it look like for those guys? How do you manage those cases when they still are working with you?
Yeah, I've somebody right now dealing with a long-term sciatica, and then she has actually consulted with the surgeon and has consulted with like pain management and working with me at the same time. So like you said, it's like talking to each individual parties in order to help her manage her. Even their surgeon was like, surgery's on the table, but I want you to maintain as much physical function as possible. And if there is like a surgery that is needed in the future, then we can do it.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, conservative care is still the way to go and allow you to be able to retain your function. And then that's kind of what we've been managing, is like helping her getting back into working out, something she loves.
Yeah.
And then but in that process there was flare ups in between, but managing like, okay, what are things that was still comfortable versus things that weren't. So I think in that period of time there was flare ups. So we always kind of talked about, it's like when you, and then this been going on for probably more than 4 to 6 months now. But in that process, it did get stagnant. She did get an epidural, and it did improve that first 3 months significantly. But then now it just kind of tapered off and hasn't really actually improved. But in terms of not improving is the pain aspect. But in terms of function, we have seen a huge increase of activity that she wasn't able to do 3 to 4 months ago.
What kind of stuff was she not able to do when she first came in,
She
and
was
why?
not able to sit for more than 3 to 4 minutes.
Okay.
at a time, wasn't able to drive, wasn't able to sleep. Now we're consistently getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep, a little bit of flare up here and there, but having the ability to sleep was huge. And the ability to sit for long periods of time for work and be able to walk for long distances. Now those are things that's capable, and be able to like squat, deadlift, work out. I think these are kind of.
How's her outlook with that?
I think with that is, her outlook is, if things continue to improve at the rate that she wants to, then surgery might be an option. But if we're continuing to raise the ceiling of that the function, then that's where she's not gonna approach that step.
Nice.
But having that on the table to consider makes it a little bit more safe for her, knowing like she does have like a plan after.
Yeah.
If
Plan
all
B.
else, yes.
Yeah, I think that's important too. Like the integration of everybody working together, right? Like the surgeon letting her know, like, hey, let's try to do what we can on this regard. If stuff hits the fan, this is an option. Utilizing the epidural to calm things down and make the flare up not be so severe, so she could do some things, right? Oral steroids would be another option, right? Just decrease inflammation. But I think that's really good, and I think it's important too. You mentioned flare-ups, which really caveats really well to the last point of this article or blog, is that 20 to 25% of people who experience sciatic symptoms will relapse. When sciatica does resolve, there's a 25% chance that it will come back within the next year, although it will not necessarily be as severe. And I think that's another important thing as we set expectations, that we can navigate through these flare-ups, but it is a possibility, and shouldn't be out of the realms of possibility that there's going to be a flare-up and you'll experience this stuff again. I think that's very important. So the line is drawn that, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just a part of the process, and it's a part of the possibilities. Right? If you do fall into this probability, because people don't really love probabilities until it applies to them, but if you do fall into this probability, there's nothing wrong with you, and I think that's huge.
So this is a really, really interesting topic in general, because I think like when you're talking about things to people and we're discussing these prognoses, right? Depending on where that person is and where they are with it. One thing that I try not to do, and I'm sure it happens with all of us, is if 20 to 25% of people relapse, I think discussing like how you were saying, I think you remove fear of the surgical potential outcome, right? I think we can try to remove fear of this relapse, but at the same time, I don't want to give people a nocebo of you're going to relapse, right? This is, even though these things can happen, that they don't always, it's okay that they may, but also not like promoting that they will, right? So there's a fine line in how we speak to our people to overcome fear versus also potentially promoting fragility as we go over these topics, right? And I think it's all just how we word it and how we interview the person and where they are that day and where they are in that moment.
I think with also this relapse, they said that people that do have their pain resolved earlier, they're less likely to have it to reoccur. And if they do have it to reoccur, the pain is less significant.
Yeah.
So having that early success is actually very important for these people for future outcomes.
Yeah.
And then for people that has persistent pain, that quick change is less likely to happen. I think that's where we got to understand, like what he was saying, like having that language and then communication aspect to be more valuable in that.
There's some hints that we can go off of.
And when you drop it, right? Like if they're flared up at that exact moment, that's not the time to go like, hey, this is going to happen again and again. You know, I think that's when they're feeling, when we drop this information, it's really important.
There's another scenario too, is if someone's pain has resolved completely with no residual effects, like residual tightness, residual pain here and there, then it's less likely. The risk for recurrence is less, right? So if it decreases very quickly, or if it resolves completely with no extra issues, then it's less likely to recur in the future, which I think can be helpful for somebody experiencing it or a clinician working with somebody. At least there's hints. But outside of that, those are the only two little hints that we got. Recurrence is possible at the end of the day. And I think that's important to lay those expectations. With that, I think that's the last main topic of the blog. Last visual that I think is really, really helpful is that that green graph with those lines all over the place. I think it's a great visual because that's following each one of those green lines, which I'll put the graphic up because there's no way you'd be able to understand what I'm talking about. Each one of those lines represents one person's journeys with their sciatica pain over time. And if you look at the graph, those lines are just all over the place, right? So whatever you're experiencing, that's unique to you most likely, and there's nothing wrong with you. And hopefully these rules, if you will, of prognosis can help better understand what to expect during the process. But realize if you do work with somebody, find somebody that is able to meet you where you're at and design something to help keep you as active as possible and give you the options of treatments that work best for you. That's all I really got in that realm.
Yeah, and then when things from the 3 to 4 months where they plateau, now this gives us to keep an eye around that mark, allows us to like check our work and check in with our clients, making sure where they're at and are we still heading in the right direction, or do they feel like they're still making progress in that sense, or have they taken a step back? So now we visit those conversations to take it to the next step of their process.
I think lastly, just to piggyback on that 3 to 4 month time period, that's just a very common time period when you are in any kind of training block. They often reach a plateau, and it might be looking at, hey, let's adjust
Changing things.
changing things up. And you see that very commonly in strength and conditioning and speed training as well. So it's interesting that you might just see that with this here. Yeah. So let's make sure that we're continually get better, continually get more robust, and hopefully those principles can tie into each other. That's all I got.
Yeah, and I think to tie in, like, there's more nuance to just say that you're going to get better in 4 to 6 weeks. And the way he puts it is it hides two facts. One, about a third of people won't feel any better at that time frame. And two, the 2/3 that do improve often have a few more weeks / months of niggling pain and reoccurrences or worse. Right? So there is nuances to this. And hopefully us going over it in detail is helpful. Hopefully we could drop some helpful, applicable things for you to take home. We look forward to doing this with some more articles. If you guys have any suggestions for us and want to give us some suggestions on what to go over and you want to learn about, let us know. Message us, email us, like, subscribe, do all the things. We can be posting this up on YouTube. So share with your friends that think would be helpful for it. So appreciate you guys watching. Until next time, again, this is Dr. Donald, Dr. Kevin, Dr. Ben, and we are Kinetic Impact.